Good morning. My name is Dan Janik. I've been coming to this church since 1979. I was married in August of 1980 by Louise Stoll in this very church. Sarah approached me to see if I would do a little talk on Ukrainian culture and traditions. And I accepted. She said, "Oh, do you know anyone?" And I said, "Well, probably me. That'd be the best one." I remember a long time ago when, before Christine started here, we were between ministers. And John Upcott gave a talk on growing up Universalist. And I remember John said, everyone has one good sermon in them. So I hope you're right, John. So here we go. A little history. My maternal grandfather, his name was Wessel, was born in Ukraine in 1895 on March 14th. It was quite a big family. There were 16 brothers and sisters. He had two sets of twin brothers. There was two sets of twins in the family. Most of them had typhoid fever. Only Wessel, actually translates to William, only Wessel and his two sisters survived. When Wessel was 17 years old, I'm not sure about the story if he was enlisted or if he was drafted into the army, but he was only 17 at the time. Now, Wessel was only about 5'6", and when he joined the army, they said, "Are you sure you're old enough?" Well, he wanted to join and fight for his country, and they questioned his age, but the sergeant said, "Well, look how hairy he is. He's got to be old enough to join." Well, so that's one thing. Ukrainians are very hairy, so I got that going for me. Now, my grandfather was captured by the Germans, but it was not like Hogan's Heroes. The POW camps were very different. The prisoners were part of a work crew. They farmed, they chopped wood, etc., and they even taught them how to be occupations. My grandfather learned how to be a cobbler, and he fixed shoes, and that became what he did besides farming. So the POW camps were much different than what you hear about because they needed the labor and keep the army going. Wessel came to Canada in 1929. Now, he came by himself. He had two sons and two daughters, and his wife. They stayed back in the Ukraine with relatives. The Canadian government was offering Crown land, and they said, whatever you cleared, you could keep. So it took him 4 years. He cleared 40 acres with basically a mule, some dynamite, and a saw and an axe. It took him 4 years to clear 40 acres and build a cabin. They were about 50 miles south of Edmonton in Alberta. The next thing he did, he called for his family to come join him. They scratched out a meager existence, and they survived the very cold winters for a few years. Now, Grandpa was a very good shot. I guess he learned it in the army. Now, he was a pretty good hunter because if you didn't shoot something, you didn't have supper that night. So that's one thing I heard, that he was a very good shot. The oldest son, my Uncle Luke, he moved to Ontario, and he was settled in the Chatham area. He wrote a letter to his father and the rest of his siblings and said, "Dad, you got to pack up the family, bring them to Ontario. It's warm here, near Point Pelee. There's beautiful farmland. It's just like back in Ukraine. You can have a great living here and have a good life. You should come to Ontario." So they packed up the whole gang, sold everything they had, put $50 in their shoe, jumped on the train, and came to Leamington. So they sharecropped here for 3 years. I think they raised $3,000. They actually bought a 75-acre farm for $3,000 back in 1933. Excuse me, friend. Now, on the 75-acre farm, they did grow, they grew soybeans, onions, wheat, corn, and tobacco. Now, a little about the Ukrainian people. The religion was very strong and very important to them because it gave them new hope because they came to a new land, and it really propped them up and kept them going with their faith. Now, the Ukrainian Orthodox was what they practiced. Ukrainian Orthodox priests were allowed to marry and have children. What better to learn from your elders than someone who has actually had children and had a wife and lived life? Now, I had the honor of being the best man at my cousin's wedding. Now, the difference between Orthodox is that everything done is threes to the Trinity. So when Roman Catholics cross themselves once, Orthodox people do it 3 times. So I do remember everything is done in threes. So when I was standing up in my cousin's wedding, what we had to do was you had to hold a gold crown above their head, and you had to have this white silk glove. You could not let the crown touch their head. And most Orthodox ceremonies last between 90 minutes to about 2 hours. So imagine holding your hand up with this crown for about 2 hours, not letting it touch their head because it was blasphemy. Now, the maid of honor had to do this too. So about 2 hours into the service, how you end the service is they say their dues and they kiss the bride, but you have to go around the altar 3 times. And that's all 5 of the priest and everyone. And you have to go around. By then, you've been switched hands about 3 times and you're getting a little bit tired. Now, they do have communion in the Orthodox Church, but it is real bread. They bless the Easter Pascha, the bread, and then you have real bread and they have real wine, and everybody gets a little bit. No, excuse me. Now, the one thing you need for a good Ukrainian wedding, you need a polka band. So when you come in, the polka band will play a small couple bars of the Ukrainian wedding march and then announces each couple as they come in the reception hall. So you'll be sitting there, all of a sudden they go bum, 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 bum. People walk in and they're announced. It's, if you're trying to have a conversation, it's different, but it's a fun tradition. After the wedding and they have after the meal, they have something called Dadavate, which means the giving or to give. So what they do, they have a receiving line and everybody lines up, and then they have a lot of the best man, and you have to be pouring shots. Now, the wedding couple will not do a shot with everybody. They will partake a little bit, but what all the guests have to do, they get a shot of, the ladies are allowed to have cherry whiskey, of course, but the men have to drink something called kurilka, which is basically rye whiskey. Now, of course, rye whiskey is supposed to put hair in your chest, so I guess that's the other reason how we got that way. I did want to talk a little bit about my mom and my Uncle Merv. They were both born in Canada. They were the only 2 that were not born in the Ukraine. Now, they were actually part of the Ukrainian Dancers. I'm sure a lot of people have seen Russian dancers on TV where it looks like you're sitting down, there's lots of kicks and jumps and everything. The Cossacks, I guess you'd call them. Ukrainian dancers are very similar to that. My mom and my Uncle Merv were dancers, and they performed the Kolomika. And they did this at weddings, they did it at their church group. And you've probably seen a lot of these things done at the Carousel of Nations. I think Toni was going to put in something on YouTube that shows some of this stuff. It should be in the on the website. Other traditions Ukrainians had were the Ukrainian Easter eggs. They were called Songkai. Now, these are the elaborate colored eggs that you've probably seen before, where they use beeswax to cover part of it, and they might dye them 8 or 10 times, and then they cover them with varnish. Now, they're done around Easter, and there's many symbols on these eggs. Wheat is for a good harvest. The egg itself is a symbol of rebirth. The sun is also depicted as a circle of life and the bringing of a new spring. Now, I'm going to let Toni come up, and she's going to explain a little bit more of some of the traditions and some of the food.
The Songkai are the best examples of Ukrainian folk art. Historically, they were made by young girls and women, monks and icon painters, bakers, and many others in the spring right before Easter. The decorations vary so much because of the background of the individual creating these works of art. The symbols used on the Songkai include plant symbols, animals, and many others. Plants frequently seen on the Easter eggs are often flowers and grains. In my collection of Songkai that I've received over the years from my mother-in-law, the animals used most often were the horse, the deer, and the sheep. The cross is the ancient symbol of sun, fire, and soul. The cross is often depicted as the intersection between two lines. Eternity is represented as vertical and time is horizontal. It is the beginning and the end. I brought a collection of eggs with me this morning, and I'm going to try to show them so that you can see them. Very, very elaborate in the patterns on these. Most eggs take more than a full day to actually be able to be done. These are just but a few. A little bit later at the end of the talk, Bill and Bobby have agreed to help me show a slideshow to you. You'll get to see a lot more of the art. In examining a variety of Easter eggs, I saw the sun in the form of 5, 6, and 8-cornered stars. The hexagonal star is a sign of 6 sides of the horizon in correlation with the sky, as well as the sign of the year, 2 halves for each of the 6 months. The octagonal star is a symbol of love. The Songkai with a star were often presented as a gift to a loved one. Each Easter, my mother-in-law has given an Easter egg of her own design to each of her children, their spouses, and the grandchildren. Each one is quite different from the next. The national flower of Ukraine is the sunflower, and sunflower oil is widely used, particularly during Lent, as the church does not limit its use, as they do with butter and other such ingredients. The sunflower represents the warmth and power of the sun and are symbols of peace. The Ukraine is a leader worldwide in the export of sunflower oil and seeds for snacks. Flowers in the Ukrainian tradition were a symbol associated with children. If a woman was trying to conceive, she would be advised to decorate Easter eggs with flowers and then gift them to children. The pine needle, as well as green trees, branches, and leaves, are a symbol of life, spring renewal, health, and growth. Many patterns include curls and spirals, which are symbols of vitality and the birth of life. Infinity symbols are found on many Songkai in the form of doodles. They symbolize water and its fluidity. On Easter eggs, water is depicted in the form of doodles, as well as zigzags and wavy patterns. A Songkai may have 40 or more sword triangles. The number 40 is symbolic in human life. 40 weeks a woman is pregnant, and in Christianity, 40 days is the period of Lent. The tree of life symbolizes the universe where every creature has its own place. The image combines time, space, life, and death. In the posted version of our presentation, you will find a lot more of the symbols explained in quite a bit of detail. As with most traditions, they are passed down from mother to daughter and grandmother to granddaughter. Our daughter, Lisa, learned from her grandmother the art of creating Ukrainian Easter eggs. She was quite young, less than 10, I believe, when we were able to get her a traditional kiska, a beeswax, and the traditional dyes from the Ukrainian lady in Edmonton. And about every other year, she continues to order fresh dyes and has started creating these eggs with her husband and her children as well. The traditional foods and the recipes are also handed down from generation to generation. It wasn't long after I was introduced to my mother-in-law to be that I started cooking with her to learn some of the special foods that graced her table at holiday times. Our family favorites include cabbage rolls, schnitzel, pierogi filled with the oldest cheddar cheese you can get for flavor and served with fried bacon, onions, and sour cream, and city chicken. City chicken might be a food that many of you haven't yet heard of. It had its roots in Ukrainian cuisine when chicken became very, very expensive for family dinners. Mothers and grandmothers would take pork, cut it into cubes. Many of us marinate it for up to a day, and then put it on skewers to resemble chicken legs. The next step is to set up 3 dredging stations, one of flour, one of eggs, and one of seasoned breadcrumbs. Once you've got everything ready, you lightly fry to brown all the sides, and then you roast it in a low temp oven for about 90 minutes. I actually made some for Dan this past week. He took some to work, and the guys at the office were going, where's ours? Another family favorite is beef goulash, which our son loves so much. He spent some time cooking with his grandmother so he could perfect his own technique to make it. I found the trickiest part of trying to recreate my mother-in-law's recipes comes from the understanding that nothing was measured. She'd make the dough and go, it should feel like this. I go, feel like what? It really wasn't that easy. Or use the old broken cup with no handle as a measuring tool. So one day as she prepped the dough for pierogies, I asked her to put each ingredient in a separate bowl. I took it out, I measured it, and wrote out a recipe card. After a few attempts on my own, my sisters-in-law and I, think we've got the recipe just right. The tradition of passing down recipes has already begun with our grandchildren. Our grandson, he's now 6, regularly asks me when he comes, can we make borscht? He isn't even in the house yet. He's in the driveway and asking for borscht. It's a traditional Ukrainian soup made with beets and cabbage, spiced with garlic and lots of fresh dill, and served alongside a dollop of sour cream. I've learned from my mother-in-law to make a heartier version, adding beef, barley, beans, and many fresh vegetables from the garden, such as green beans and carrots. All we need is a slice or 2 of rye bread, and the meal is complete. Bobby, would you do us the pleasure of showing the slideshow, please, so that our audience at home can see it? I'm going to sit back for a minute and just let you take a look at the slideshow. Sure, no problem. In the meantime, while she's getting that set up for you, I'm going to try to show you some of the goodies I brought into the sanctuary this morning. Is this visible? This is a loaf of braided Songkai egg bread, which is eaten at Easter time. And I brought some goulash, K-O-L-A-C-H-E. Without the E, it just means bread. But this is a loaf of goulash, and it's done in a circular shape. That's what goulash means, it's circular. And this one is stuffed with walnuts, and a second one that I brought has poppy seeds. So you see the 2 different types. If you try to pick it up in a bakery, they will sometimes call it strudel, but it's really not what I expect strudel to look like. And Bobby is ready to show you the presentation. So in the first one, you see one of my mother-in-law's eggs sitting on the teacup saucer. And this is Dan's grandfather, known as Guido, Wessel. That picture was taken on the steps of our church on our wedding day. This is Dan's Uncle Merv dancing the kolameka. And you can see there's a little guy bent down in the middle of that circle, and he's squatting down and doing the kicks and flicks while everybody dances around him. Go ahead and dance it. Here's the teacup. So I brought it into the sanctuary this morning. So this is one my mother-in-law gave me when early on in our marriage. This is a pattern you will find on tablecloths and tea towels and many other Ukrainian porcelain items. We're good. The Polka bread, so this one has sesame seeds on it, most of them don't, but this is the one that I picked up on Tuesday from the bakery before I had a chance to put my order in. But it is packed with eggs, and some bakeries do it more eggy than others. When I make mine this Easter, it'll be extremely eggy. It'll be very, very yellow when we cut into it. Yeah. So this one is the smallest Ukrainian wedding bread I could order. It literally takes most of the table of our offertory table here at the church this morning. Weighs about 4 pounds. It is the smallest one. It is all egg bread and very elaborately braided on top. Some of them that I've seen at cousins' weddings have little pictures of wheat on them and actually made out of bread and attached to the outside of the bread before it's baked. Some of them have chickens, various symbols of prosperity. That's the top view, and the next view is from the side to give you an idea of how big this is. When I took this photograph, it was sitting on the card table in our dining room. So, and that's the small one. So we're going to have some fun eating this one this week. These are part of the collection of my Songkai eggs, and you can see a lot of the symbols on it that I've mentioned this morning, and some of them that you're going to read more about when you look at the printed version of the service or the web edition later. Yeah. And the next one is a picture of my stacking doll. This one actually has 5 different dolls inside. And the next slide will show you when I unstacked it, just to show you an idea of what it all looks like. So I wouldn't be pulling it apart this morning. This one, I was blessed to have a friend who was sent as a librarian to do a lecture over in a country very, very close to the Ukraine. She got to go to the Ukrainian market, and she picked it up from me knowing that I've been looking for a long time for my own doll. And this is the walnut goulash that we had earlier in the week, and I just gave it a couple slices so you can see just the circular pattern of it. And this is the city chicken. So it tastes very much like chicken, and because of the presentation on the skewers, most of the little kids thought it represented chicken legs. So thank you very much for that. I'll give you back to Dan.
Well, I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity, and hope we've given you a little glimpse inside our Ukrainian heritage and the traditions of my family. Thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to Sarah.